friends, and some heartwarming news. 1. A plan for Russia to establish its first naval base in Africa will go ahead, Sudan's foreign minister has confirmed, after years of delays over the Red Sea military port. If the agreement is implemented, Russia would join the US and China in the region. They have bases to the south in Djibouti. The announcement came during a visit by the foreign minister, Ali Youssef Ahmed al-Sharif, to Moscow, where he met his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov. After their meeting, Sharif said the two countries were in complete agreement on establishing a Russian base and there are no obstacles. The Red Sea is one of the world's most strategically important waterways, connecting the Suez Canal to the Indian Ocean. About 12% of global trade passes through it. Sudan first floated the idea of allowing Russia to have a naval facility on its coast in 2017 during a trip to Sochi by Omar al-Bashir, the then president, who was ousted in a 2019 coup. A deal was eventually signed in 2020 that reportedly permitted Russia to keep up to 4 Navy ships, including nuclear-powered ones, in Sudan for a period of 25 years. At the time, a draft agreement said the bases were for logistical purposes and were defensive and not aimed against other countries. After the meeting with Lavrov, Sharif said a new deal was not required as there was a deal signed, in 2020, and there is no disagreement, adding that it only had to be ratified by both sides. Sudan's military and civilian leaders dragged their feet on moving ahead with the deal due to lingering differences over its terms. The civil war that started in April 2023 between the army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces further complicated relations between Russia and Sudan, as the Russian-backed Wagner Group threw its weight behind the RSF while the Kremlin appeared to back the Sudanese army. Russia was playing both sides, said Samuel Ramani, an associate fellow at the Royal United Services Institute think tank and the author of a book on Moscow's engagements with Africa. Since the death of Yevgeny Prigozhin, the Wagner mercenary group's leader, the Kremlin had incrementally deepened ties with the Sudanese army, Ramani added. Last April, Russia's deputy foreign minister, Mikhail Bogdanov, visited Sudan and pledged uncapped support for its army. Russia has also backed Sudan at the UN Security Council, where it vetoed a resolution calling for a ceasefire for humanitarian reasons, a move the UK Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, called a disgrace. Mexico's president has accused the US of harboring drug cartels and American citizens of working with organized crime groups in Mexico, in a riposte to Donald Trump's allegation of an intolerable alliance between traffickers and her government. There is also organized crime in the United States and there are American people who come to Mexico with these illegal activities, Claudia Sheinbaum said during her morning press conference on Thursday. Otherwise, who would distribute fentanyl in the cities of the United States? The Mexican president's comments follow a report published on Monday which showed that arrests of U.S. citizens for offenses related to organized crime had increased by more than 450% during the tenure of her predecessor, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Sheinbaum called on Washington not just to help crack down on cartels in Mexico, but for the United States to do its job in the U.S., to make the arrests that need to be made in order to halt the trafficking of drugs in its own country. The Trump administration has repeatedly attacked Mexico for the flow of drugs northwards, particularly fentanyl, even designating certain cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. Donald Trump also threatened to impose 25% tariffs on all goods from Mexico due to the northward flow of drugs and migrants, before Sheinbaum agreed to send an additional 10,000 National Guard troops to the U.S.-Mexico border. Security experts say that Mexican organized crime groups in the United States are widespread, and are key to the distribution of drugs such as fentanyl across the nation. They're in virtually every corner of the country, no doubt about it, said Jack Riley, former head of the Chicago office of the Drug Enforcement Administration. In terms of the control of the dope, the movement of narco money, I would say they're the number one. But taking down such groups would require efforts from both countries, he said. Riley also noted that American citizens have become increasingly involved in smuggling drugs across the border. Anybody that has dual citizenship, or U.S. citizenship, can be influenced and corrupted by the cartels, he said. Almost all of that occurs at the border checkpoints in vehicles. It's not the guy with the backpacks when they cross the Rio Grande. During her news conference, Sheinbaum also mentioned Mexico's spat with Google Maps' decision to rename the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America, apparently at the behest of Trump, noting that the government had exchanged correspondence with the tech giant. If necessary, we will file a civil suit, she said. Even President Trump isn't proposing that the entire Gulf of Mexico be called the Gulf of America, but only their continental shelf. So Google is wrong. News 3, a British shipping company that became the largest in the world at the height of empire continued to use the labor of enslaved people after the abolition of slavery, research has found. The Royal Mail Steam Packet Company, RMSPC, which received a royal charter from Queen Victoria in 1839, used enslaved workers on the tiny island of St. Thomas, which was a Danish colony at the time and is now part of the U.S. Virgin Islands. Slavery in the British Empire was abolished in 1833, but RMSPC continued to use enslaved labourers on St. Thomas, its main coaling hub. The labourers had to use dangerous gangplanks to unload Welsh coal imported on the island. The Postal Museum commissioned the research, which was supported by Dr. Ner Animado, an academic advisor, and it is part of a new exhibition about the postal industry's connections with the slavery economy. Joanne Espin, a senior curator at the museum, said the research showed how the global postal service and its connected companies were a tool of empire rather than just a communication source. She said, by steaming its ships outside the British Empire where slavery hadn't been abolished, the RMSPC was able to exploit slave labor on the island. It is a complex story, but we're trying to show the choices made by the business and the way that the company benefited by exploiting enslaved labor. The exhibition features postcards, letters, paintings and clothing from the era, alongside correspondence between UK plantation owners and Caribbean managers discovered in the museum's archives. Letters from two enslaved women who secured freedom through manumission and protested against working conditions also feature in the exhibition, which is called Voices of Resistance, Slavery and Post in the Caribbean and opens in April. The exhibition has been created with Dollar for Dollar, a St. Thomas-based organization, which researches and raises awareness of the island's coal workers. Aisha Morris, of Dollar for Dollar, said her organization wanted to spread awareness of the memories of those who, basket by basket, fueled steamships coming into the St. Thomas harbor for about a century, who courageously fought for better wages and working conditions. RMSPC, which was founded in Liverpool, was one of the most significant British companies of the Victorian era. It collapsed after what one writer called one of the greatest frauds in history. At the company's 1920 annual general meeting, its leadership boasted that RMSPC was carrying ocean trades in practically all parts of the world, and a few years later the company's ships carried 1.4 million passengers, transported nearly 14 million tons of cargo and employed more than 35,000 people on its vessels. News 4, Japan is to flood the market with almost 250,000 tons of stockpiled rice in an unprecedented attempt to arrest soaring prices caused by record summer heat, panic buying and distribution problems. The government will release up to 210,000 tons of rice, the agriculture minister, Taku Eto, said on Friday, as consumers battled a surge in prices of more than 50% in recent months. Speaking shortly before the decision, Eto noted that the government did not normally intervene in the market, but conceded that recent price rises have had a significant impact on people's lives. The price hike has been too sharp, which is why we have made this decision. The latest average retail price of a 5 kilograms, £11, bag of the Japanese staple was 3,688 yen, according to a government survey, up from 2,023 yen last year. Japan's government has previously dipped into its rice reserves in the aftermath of natural disasters or crop failures, but this is the first time it has intervened over distribution issues, including when supply chain disruption contributes to rising prices. Japan's rice stockpiles had already depleted after record-breaking temperatures affected the 2023 crop. Stockpiles shrank again last year, partly due to a rise in consumption caused by record numbers of tourists. Supplies were also hit by panic buying in the wake of typhoon and earthquake warnings, forcing some retailers to restrict sales. The price of rice continued to leap after an initial rise last summer, as a shortage triggered by extreme temperatures the previous year sent demand spiraling. The government had hoped prices would stabilize when newly harvested rice went on sale last autumn, but they continued to go up. Although the 2024 harvest was 180,000 tons more than that of 2023, distributors secured less of the grain than a year earlier, amid speculation that farmers and wholesalers were hoarding in anticipation of further price rises, the Kyodo news agency said. The stockpiled rice will be sold to agricultural cooperatives and wholesalers in the middle of next month and should be on sale by early April, media reports said. The government has to buy back an equivalent quantity of rice from distributors within a year to prevent prices from collapsing. While the location of rice storage facilities are not disclosed for security reasons, a warehouse in Saitama Prefecture near Tokyo opened its doors to the media ahead of Friday's announcement. That warehouse holds about 20,000 tons of rice, enough to fill 300 meters bowls. Japan can draw on almost 1 million tons of reserve rice held at about 300 facilities across the country, according to the Asahi Shimbun. The Agriculture Ministry buys around 200,000 tons of rice a year for its emergency reserves and stores it for 5 years before selling it, mostly as animal feed, the newspaper added. Japan began stockpiling rice in 1995 after a major rice crop failure 2 years earlier sparked panic buying. News 5, wetland bird hunters in Victoria will have a longer duck shooting season and can take home more birds under new rules. The Victorian duck hunting season will begin on the 19th of March and run for 83 days until 9 June, up from 56 days in 2024. Hunters can bag 9 ducks a day, up from 6, with 7 duck species allowed. But the blue-winged shoveler is off the list this season, and lead shot cannot be used for quail hunting. New shooters seeking a license must undergo online training, including Aboriginal cultural awareness training, as part of promised safety and sustainability measures. Outdoor Recreation Minister, Steve Dimopoulos, said duck hunting was a legitimate activity that could be done sustainably and responsibly. Our wounding reduction action plan will improve animal welfare and is a significant step to make sure recreational hunting can continue sustainably in Victoria, he said. Victorian Animal Justice Party MP Georgie Purcell criticised the government for the most reckless season in more than a decade. Purcell said the decision to go through with another season would condemn 400,000 native waterbirds to ruthless slaughter. This is an unpopular decision by an unpopular premier who continuously cowers to the shooting and gun lobby, she said. Waterbird populations have dropped by almost 50% in the past year due to drought conditions, according to the Eastern Australian Waterbird Survey. An estimated 391,900 ducks were hunted in the state in 2024, about 22% higher than average, Game Management Authority figures show, despite bag limits and a shortened season. More than 455,000 stubble quails were harvested, almost triple the long-term average. Those figures followed the Victorian government's decision to ignore a parliamentary inquiry that in 2023 recommended a ban on duck hunting. Instead of a total ban, the government in 2024 shortened the season, implemented a bag limit of 6 a day and pledged to introduce adaptive harvest management, hunter education and training and waterfowl wounding reduction measures. Wildlife Victoria criticised the state government's 2025 move, calling for the abolishment of duck hunting in Victoria. This has gone on for far too long, it said in a statement. The ignoring of the recommendations of the 2023 inquiry is completely reckless and has ignored the overwhelming majority of Victorians who want to see this practice banned. Duck hunting has long been banned in Western Australia, New South Wales, and Queensland. News 6, in Donald Trump's world, everything has its price. There is no place for sentiment in his politics. Common values cannot secure loans for military aid. And the US president does not care who controls the blood-soaked soils of East Ukraine, so long as he can access the rare earth minerals that lie beneath. The peace Trump will negotiate is not about justice. There is no deeper moral or morality here except for who got it done, and Trump has signaled that he is ready to pressure Ukraine and Europe to provide concessions to entice Russia to sign on the dotted line. All that's left for him is to hash out a price. "I'm just here to try and get peace," Trump said in the Oval Office, where he riffs out policy daily. "I don't care so much about anything other than I want to stop having millions of people killed." It is difficult to put into words what an about-face this is for US support for Ukraine, which for years was built on helping the country defend itself, though not win the war. The Biden administration helped manage the symptoms of Russian aggression. Now, Trump says he's going to provide the cure. But it is an unwelcome one. Stop resisting. Since Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022, the adage in the Oval Office had been nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. Biden officials regularly said in public that Ukraine itself would decide when it was ready to negotiate. But that was before the US election. It wasn't the issue of Ukrainian manpower or the supply of weapons that ultimately brought us to this point, it was the price of eggs in Pennsylvania. The Biden administration's biggest betrayal of Ukraine may have been to lose the US elections, effectively surrendering Ukraine's second front to America first. "We're the thing that's holding it back, and frankly, we'll go as long as we have to go, because we're not going to let the other happen," said Trump, in what may be the only silver lining of his remarks on Monday, indicating he wouldn't allow Ukraine to collapse completely. But President Putin wants that peace now, and that's good, and he didn't want to have peace with Biden. Some Ukrainian and Russian observers may believe the US president has a deeper plan here, perhaps to consolidate Europe and then pressure Russia as a united front while sinking the oil price. But judging by his actions in Gaza, or in the United States, there is likely to be no deeper plan. Assigning Steve Witkoff, his go-to deal-maker who negotiated the Gaza ceasefire for hostages deal, rather than the hawkish General Keith Kellogg, indicates that the process will be maximally unsentimental. Just another real estate deal. Now, much of Europe is wondering whether Trump is about to deliver them a fait accompli on their eastern flank, seeking to commit European troops with no NATO protection to Ukraine in a security agreement negotiated exclusively between Moscow and Washington. And that's all for international news. And coming up next, it's weather forecast that morning. This will be a few moments. We'll be right back. morning, everyone. Welcome to Weather Forecast Lads Morning on this fine Saturday, February 15th, 2025. I'm your host, James Wandens 13, bringing you the latest updates on today's weather conditions across Australia. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get started.
Good morning, Australia. Welcome to Australian Lads News Morning, your trusted source for the latest updates from around the world. I'm First Galaxy Australian 2K10, and it's Saturday, February 15, 2025. As we move past Valentine's Day, we'll be covering some of the most important headlines from politics, business, sports, and international affairs. News 7, Tropical Cyclone Zelia has made landfall along the Pilbara coast as a strong Category 4 system, bringing destructive wind gusts up to 290 km per hour amid warnings it is now too late to leave. The cyclone, downgraded from an anticipated Category 5, crossed 65 km east of Port Hedland just after noon AWST on Friday, traveling faster, 11 km per hour, than authorities had warned. Port Hedland sits on the people. As of 5 p.m. local time, it was tracking south over the inland's eastern Pilbara as a Category 3 system, with wind gusts of up to 250 km per hour and a warning zone extending from Wallal Downs to Wim Creek. Port Hedland was included in the warning zone and was being hit with severe winds but had avoided the cyclone's destructive core. Heavy rainfall and possible flash flooding was likely across coastal and inland areas into Saturday, with flood warnings in place for the De Grey River, where minor flooding was occurring, and Pilbara coastal rivers. The risk was expected to ease for Port Hedland and Purdue overnight, the Bureau of Meteorology's Miriam Bradbury said, with the cyclone to rapidly decay as it moved inland and dropped to a Category 2 system on Saturday morning. Even though the system is weakening, it will still pack a punch, particularly in terms of rainfall, Bradbury said, anticipating totals of up to 200 mm for much of the Pilbara to Sunday, and possible flooding. Port Hedland local Glenn Bedford, a mechanical technical officer at BHP's port operations, said machinery and conveyor belts at the port have been tied down since Wednesday afternoon. Bedford said the sky had been dark for more than 2 days, and that he remained stuck in his home with a toilet that had flooded through the LED light in the ceiling as 90 km per hour winds hit. The shops are empty, all water is gone, canned goods are gone, and there is always a line at the bottle shop before a cyclone, Bedford said. Everyone is now locked in their house, no one is allowed out on the streets, and I think you get a fine if you get caught out driving around, he said. My neighbor's tree is down already. Matthew Colopi, general manager of the Bureau's Environmental Prediction Services, said while there was still intense danger in the region, the storm surge risk in line with the movement of the cyclone is greatly reduced for the Port Hedland area. He said the system was still producing very heavy rainfall, with totals expected to be up to 300 mm over the next 24 hours, and 3-day totals of 500 mm possible. The system expanded over Thursday night, with the cyclone stretching to Wallal Downs along the coast, and inland through to Tom Price and Newman. Angus Hines, a meteorologist with the Bureau, said the system was expected to be very damaging. News 8, the artistic duo dropped from representing Australia at the 61st Venice Biennale say they are extremely hurt and disappointed by Creative Australia's decision to rescind their appointment, after media and political pressure. Award-winning Lebanese-Australian artist Khaled Sabsabi, and curator Michael D'Agostino were announced last week as the successful team for the 2026 Biennale on the advice of a panel of independent industry advisors. After a late-night board meeting on Thursday, Creative Australia took the unprecedented step to dump the team after criticism of Sabsabi's art by the Australian and the Shadow Arts Minister, Claire Chandler. Art should not be censored as artists reflect the times they live in, Sabsabi and D'Agostino said in a statement to Guardian Australia. We intended to present a transformational work in Venice, an experience that would unite all audiences in an open and safe shared space. This reflects and builds on the work we have done for decades and will do for many more. We believe in the vision of artists for an inclusive future that can bring us together to communicate and progress our shared humanity. We also believe that, despite this decision, the Australian art world will not dim and/or be silent. In a letter addressed to the board of Creative Australia, the other artists and curators shortlisted for the Australian Pavilion condemned the decision, and called for Sabsabi and D'Agostino to be reinstated. We believe that revoking support for the current Australian artist and curator representatives for Venice Biennale 2026 is antithetical to the goodwill and hard-fought artistic independence, freedom of speech and moral courage that is at the core of arts in Australia, which plays a crucial role in our thriving and democratic nation, they wrote. On Wednesday, the Australian published an article criticising Sabsabi for what it described as a questionable and ambiguous depiction of former Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, in a 2007 video installation titled You. On the Museum of Contemporary Art website, the work is described as purposefully ambiguous. Sabsabi has manipulated the video footage, obscuring Nasrallah's face with beams of light that shine from his eyes and mouth, suggestive of a divine illumination. The work plays on Western fears of cultural difference, and also suggests the all-pervasiveness of the public news media, and its ability to deify or vilify, and to generate suspicion or panic through the intensive repetition of imagery on our television screens, day in and day out. The article in The Australian also took issue with Sabsabi for joining a boycott of the 2022 Sydney Festival because of a sponsorship deal with the Israeli embassy. And that's a wrap for today's Australian Last News Morning. Thank you for joining me. Stay tuned for more updates throughout the day on FK2K10 HD. Up next, we have more weekend programming, so stick around, and a good morning everyone.